This video provides information about the fiscal year 2023 round of the Paul Bruhn Historic Revitalization Grant Program from the National Park Service State Tribal Local Plans and Grants Division. This video will cover an overview of the program, eligible subgrant programs, eligible applicants, grant amounts, timelines and requirements, application requirements and process, and some tips and resources for your application. National Park Service is now accepting applications for this program submitted through grants.gov under funding opportunity number P23AS00515. The application deadline is March 19th, 2024. Funding for the Paul Bruhn Historic Revitalization Grant Program comes from the Historic Preservation Fund, which was established in 1976 and provides funding to the state and tribal historic preservation offices, thousands of local governments, and hundreds of nonprofits each year through the variety of competitive grant programs appropriated by Congress. The source of funding for the Historic Preservation Fund is oil and gas lease revenues from the Outer Continental Shelf, not tax dollars. The Paul Bruhn Historic Revitalization Grant Program was established by Congress in 2018 and in 2019 was renamed in honor of Paul Bruhn, the late executive director of the Preservation Trust of Vermont. The program was inspired by a HUD-funded subgrant program that Paul Bruhn initiated in Vermont in the 1990s. There are three distinctive attributes of the Paul Bruhn program. First, that it is a subgrant program. Second, it places an emphasis on economic revitalization through historic preservation projects. And third, it is targeted to rural communities. I'm going to talk about each of these aspects in greater detail. A subgrant program is one where a prime grantee applies for and receives a block grant from the National Park Service. The prime grantee then designs their own competitive subgrant program that meets specific economic revitalization and historic preservation goals. They solicit applications from eligible applicants, review submissions, and make subgrant awards to multiple smaller projects that meet those goals, and then monitor the subgrant projects and provide payments to those subgrant recipients. One of the distinctive attributes of the Paul Bruhn program is that it focuses on economic revitalization through historic preservation. To do that, prime grantees use the grant funds that they have been awarded to support projects that have demonstrable economic revitalization outcomes. These subgrants can be awarded to a variety of applicant types that the prime grantee identifies, but it can include privately owned properties. And examples of successful revitalization programs include facade improvements, programs focused on historic theaters, community centers, and other resource types that have very specific economic revitalization relationships. Another distinctive attribute of the Paul Bruhn program is that it is targeted to rural communities. That means that the subgrant projects selected by prime grantees must be located in rural communities as defined by the United States Census. We're going to talk in greater detail about what areas are considered rural, but generally speaking, they're areas outside of municipalities of more than 50,000 people and the adjacent urbanized areas. This is different from the definition used in prior rounds for the Paul Bruhn program. But because prime grantees have the option to design a program that meets their specific community's needs, those programs could be targeted on individual neighborhoods, smaller villages or population centers, or specific counties within a broader region or state. So what areas of the United States are considered rural? For purposes of the Paul Bruhn program, we are following the same definition as the United States Department of Agriculture rural business programs. Those programs define rural places as all areas of a state that are not within urban areas. And urban areas include municipalities with populations of 50,000 or more and their adjacent urbanized areas as defined by the United States Census in 2020. This map is a screenshot from the online GIS mapping tool used by the United States Department of Agriculture to show eligible and not eligible rural areas. In this image, you will see an area around Indianapolis, Indiana, that shows some darker shaded orange areas that are considered urban or urbanized. Rural areas are all the places around those urbanized areas. So rural are all the places of a state that are not urban. Here are some examples of eligible and ineligible rural places. Eligible places might include a city with a population of 20,000 people that has limited adjacent suburban development, and that development is not defined as urban by the 2020 US Census. Also eligible would be areas within a large county that has a population of 250,000 people total, if those areas are not considered urban as of the 2020 US Census. Not eligible for the program would be inner ring suburban municipalities that say have a population of 5,000 people but borders a large city of 100,000 and is included in an urbanized area. Also, unincorporated areas of a county near a large city that is included within the urbanized area for that city are not eligible. So who may apply for PRIME grants? State Historic Preservation Offices, Tribal Historic Preservation Offices, certified local governments, new for the 2023 round, special district governments except school districts. That could include regional development districts, regional planning agencies, economic development agencies, or other types of special district governments as allowed in your state, and nonprofit organizations. The maximum grant is $750,000. Non-federal match is not required. As a PRIME grantee, these are some of the things that you will be expected to do. You will develop subgrant program guidelines, application materials, agreements, and other documents. You'll conduct outreach and promotion of the subgrant program, manage the competitive selection process for your subgrants, execute subgrant agreements, manage the review process and compliance process with the National Park Service for your subgrant projects, monitor those subgrants for compliance with the approved work, facilitate easements and agreements for subgrant projects, disperse those payments to subgrantees, and prepare and submit all reports to the National Park Service for the grant and subgrant program projects. So what are some examples of eligible subgrant programs that could be funded through the Paul Bruhn program? Well, you will define what your community needs to achieve economic revitalization through historic preservation. And that will include defining what the target communities are for your funding. Is it a specific neighborhood? Is it a set of individual counties? Is it a corridor along a river? What types of resources? Public buildings, private stores, churches, community centers, of any type of specific resource types that you might think are important to achieving economic revitalization in your community. What types of applicants are eligible? Individuals, nonprofits, local governments. What kinds of projects are you willing to fund? Are you only interested in funding facade improvements? What about roofs or electrical system upgrades? How much of the subgrants that you're planning to award? And what kind of matching requirements are you going to require of your subgrantees? In your application, you will describe what the broad parameters of your subgrant program will be. Are you going to target it to a single neighborhood or commercial district? Is this going to be available to buildings throughout a whole region or across an entire state? Maybe you're only going to work in designated Main Street communities, or be focused on facade improvements or upper story housing. Or maybe there are going to be specific white elephant buildings or buildings like theaters that you're going to focus on in your program. But the two key aspects of a successful application for one of our grants is that the subgrant program you're proposing must be designed to address economic revitalization goals, and the properties receiving those subgrants must be located in rural places. One important aspect of this program is that all subgrant projects must be competitively selected following the award of the prime grant. That means that you may not submit an application that identifies single buildings or pre-selected buildings or projects to the National Park Service for funding. You must define what your program will be and then competitively solicit and select the projects after you've been awarded the prime grant. Also, subgrant properties must be listed in or eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, but those that have only been determined eligible must be listed by the conclusion of the prime grant period. Costs for preparing National Register nominations are eligible uses of the Paul Bruhn Grant Fund by the prime grantee. Some of the requirements for your subgrant program is that all the work must meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for archaeology and historic preservation. It must comply with Section 106, Section 110, and the National Environmental Policy Act. You're required to execute a preservation agreement or easement for the property. And there must be competitive selection and NPS approval of consultants and contractors working on the subgrant projects. These are some of the eligible costs you might include in your prime grant budget in the application you're going to submit to the National Park Service for your prime grant. Subgrants for those construction projects, costs related to the promotion of your subgrant program, hiring technical or design assistance for your subrecipients or to assist you in your grant compliance activities, easement preparation and recording, required project signs, program management for which might include new or existing staff or contractors hired to manage this program for your organization, and costs related to grant administration, which includes the reporting and financial management aspects of your grant. The types of projects that are not eligible for a Paul Bruhn grant include archaeological investigations beyond a phase 2, reconnaissance surveys, reconstruction of entire buildings or substantially reconstructing parts that are missing, new construction, acquisition of property, collections, and any work that is completed prior to the execution of a grant or subgrant agreement. All subgrant projects are required to execute an easement or a preservation agreement on the property. The length of that agreement and whether it is a recorded easement or an unrecorded agreement is determined by the amount of the federal funds awarded. Those easements are typically held by the State Historic Preservation Office in your state, but we may consider other easement holding organizations if that organization has prior history and experience with easements. This is the typical life cycle of a Bruhn grant. It begins with the awarding of a prime grant to the prime grantee. That prime grantee then develops sub-grant program guidelines, solicits applications, selects the projects, submits those projects to NPS for review and approval, announces those subgrants, executes a subgrant agreement. The subgrantee then provides the prime grantee with the plans and specifications that they're going to use for construction, and the prime grantee then submits those to the National Park Service for review and approval. After the Park Service finishes our review, we consult with the State Historic Preservation Office and other consulting parties, and when ready for approval, we notify the prime grantee, who then notifies the subgrantee and authorizes them to begin construction. As the project progresses, the prime grantee pays the subgrantee for the costs that they are incurring and draws down the funds to reimburse their organization from the National Park Service. And then when the subgrantee completes the project, the prime grantee provides all of the final documentation back to the National Park Service. And throughout this whole life cycle, the prime grantee is also submitting interim progress reports to the National Park Service about not only the expenditures of the prime grant, but the progress of each of the subgrant projects. So here's some tips for some competitive applications in the 2023 round. Make sure that your project narrative shows a clear grasp of and a relationship to the revitalization goals for your community. The most successful applications will be very targeted to specific types of resources or types of communities that are related to those revitalization goals. Successful applications will also be associated with other types of plans, comprehensive plans or economic development plans for a city or neighborhood or entire region. Successful applications will also show that you have some administrative capability for this, to manage this grant, or a plan to hire or procure that assistance. And will generally limit the administrative costs, those costs that are associated with the reporting and financial management, especially to 5% of the grant award total. Applications will be scored on 4 different criteria: the subgrant program objectives, the need, urgency, and threat for the subgrant program, the feasibility of the program, and the sustainability of the project's outcomes. There are specific sub-criteria specified in the Notice of Funding Opportunity available on grants.gov, and we strongly encourage you to review those closely and respond to each of those points in your application narrative. If you're thinking about applying, please make sure that you are properly registered in grants.gov and have the appropriate roles necessary to submit the application materials. And be sure to thoroughly review and download the Notice of Funding Opportunity and all of the related documents from grants.gov for this opportunity. You'll also need to make sure that your organization is registered with sam.gov and has a unique entity identifier, a UEI. If you have not applied for federal funds before, then you will need to complete this registration and give yourselves at least 2 weeks to get that active or reactivated. We cannot award you a grant if your sam.gov registration is lapsed. Make sure you know your organization's unique entity identifier, which is a combination of letters and numbers that replaced the DUNS number in spring 2022. and those numbers are available at sam.gov. Both grants.gov and sam.gov are systems administered by other federal agencies, and the National Park Service cannot assist with your login or technical issues for these sites. So you should make sure you contact the help desk for each of those websites individually and directly if you need assistance. A good tip is, again, to make sure that you have reviewed all of the materials in the NOFO package and related documents tab completely and thoroughly. Make sure you include all of the required items listed in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, because incomplete applications will not be considered for funding. This is a list of the generally required information for a complete application, which includes an SF424 series of documents, a disclosure of lobbying activities, an itemized list of the attachments, project abstract summary, a program description worksheet, budget justification worksheet, project images, an indirect cost statement, and letters of support or owner consent if applicable. Pictures are worth thousands of words in the review of your applications, but only if they're relevant. Include examples of the types of places or buildings that might be funded. Again, you may not pre-select the projects that are going to receive these grant funds at the time that you apply, but you may show us the types of places you are trying to target with your sub-grant program. If you have solicited letters of support for your application, be sure that they are scanned and submitted as attachments with your application. And if you are involving other partners, nonprofit organizations, local governments, or other agencies, be sure to include letters that illustrate their partner involvement and commitment. Familiarize yourselves with the procurement requirements for professional services and construction activities, and make sure that you're prepared to meet the competitive selection requirements for federal funds. And be sure to review and address the easement requirements in your narrative, including money for document preparation and recording fees if necessary. Reach out to your state historic preservation office or other easement holding organization who may want to hold the easements, and speak with them before you submit your application. Some good advice is to give yourself plenty of time to prepare this application. Make sure you gather all of your completed materials before logging into grants.gov to submit that application. Ask someone who is unfamiliar with your project to read your application first. Make sure it makes sense to them, because if they don't understand it, the chances of our reviewers understanding it are also slim. And expect the unexpected, including glitches and system outages. Please don't wait until the last minute to start your application, because sometimes these systems don't work the way that they are supposed to. There are resources on our website at www.nps.gov/subject/historic preservation fund/how to apply. And information about how to manage your grant on that same website. So just as a reminder, all applications for the 2023 round of the Paul Bruhn Historic Revitalization Grant Program must be submitted through grants.gov under funding opportunity number P23AS00515 by the deadline of March 19th, 2024. If you have questions, you can email our general delivery mailbox at stlpg@nps.gov or visit our website go.nps.gov/revitalization.